Welcome to the Mom is a Fit YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to break down an overview of how we create space in the pelvis. As a spoiler, there is no one movement that opens your entire pelvis. Different movement patterns open the 3 different levels of your pelvis. And so I'm going to break down what are those 3 levels and how do each of these pelvic levels open so that you can have an easier labor. Hey, my name is Gina. I'm a perinatal fitness trainer and birth doula and mom of 4. I'm going to break down how do we create space in each of these pelvic levels because this is my specialty as a doula and as a fitness trainer. The unique thing about Mama Stay Fit is we are both perinatal fitness trainer and birth workers. And so we combine the expertise of these 2 supporting fields to provide more of a comprehensive support for you from conception all the way through your pregnancy, your birth, and beyond. And so I'm going to break down how do you open each of these pelvic levels. Your pelvis has 3 main levels. The pelvic inlet is the very top of your pelvis. This is where your baby's going to first enter or engage. The mid pelvis is the middle or the bony structure that baby's going to navigate through. This is also going to include a lot of tissues and ligaments and muscles. So it's not just bony structure. There's also a lot of other structures that baby is moving through as well. The very bottom of the pelvis is the pelvic outlet. So this is where your baby's going to exit from the pelvis. Each of these pelvic levels opens in different ways. So what opens one pelvic level may actually be closing another one. And so we want to be mindful to ensure that we can do 4 different types of movement patterns. One is going to be external hip rotation with abduction to create more space in the top part of the pelvis. We want to be able to find more internal hip rotation with adduction to create more space in the bottom part of the pelvis. And then we want to be able to find internal and external hip rotation to create space in the middle of the pelvis, in addition to internal and external pelvic rotation. And I'll discuss what each of those movement patterns looks like and break down each of these pelvic levels. The very top of the pelvis is the pelvic inlet. So this is where your baby's going to first enter or engage into the pelvis. The pelvic inlet is going to open more with external hip rotation and abduction. So this means that the leg is rotating externally. So knee goes out, ankle comes in addition to abducting, so moving away from midline. If we only did the abduction, this actually could decrease space in the pelvic inlet. But when we combine it with the external rotation and move it away, it creates more space side to side in the top part of the pelvis. The next thing that we want to think about for the pelvic inlet is going to be pelvic tilting. We find more of an arch in our back, so we're arching in the back and more of an anterior pelvic tilt. This is going to change this pubic bone angle and bring it more forward to make it easier for baby to kind of drop and enter into the pelvis. And so that is going to create more space in the anterior or front portion of your pelvic inlet. And then if we want to create more space in the posterior or back portion of the pelvic inlet, we want to find more of a posterior pelvic tilt where we're tucking the butt underneath and finding more of a round in the back. That is going to help to move this sacral promontory, which is the junction between your lumbar spine and sacrum, backwards to create more space front to back in the top of the pelvis. And so for the pelvic inlet, we need external hip rotation with abduction, so legs wider, in addition to that front to back pelvic tilting to create more space front to back in the top part of the pelvis. A common labor position to do this is going to be seated on a ball or in all fours, where the legs are going to be a little bit wider and we're going to be arching in the back and then tucking the pelvis underneath, doing some pelvic rocking while seated or in an all fours position. The good news is during pregnancy, it's typically really easy to find the external hip rotation and that anterior pelvic tilt because we already live there. We already favor more of this open position just based on belly growing and pulling us in that direction. So it can be really beneficial to incorporate exercises that release the hip flexors, the lat musculature, and emphasize more back expansion to decompress space in the back part of the pelvis and make it easier for you to tuck that tailbone underneath. We incorporate 3 exercises within our free Mama Stay Fit birth prep circuit to help you find more of that posterior pelvic tilt, because it is a harder movement to find during pregnancy, which could make it a little bit harder to find during labor. And then note, if you're looking for more movements that you can do prenatally to help your baby engage and enter into the pelvis, we've got several YouTube videos that break down engagement in addition to our birth prep workout series. The next level of the pelvis is the mid pelvis, or the middle bony structure that your baby's going to be rotating through. So pelvic inlet, baby engages, and then they're going to rotate through the middle of the pelvis. The mid pelvis can be divided into 2 subsections. We have our upper mid pelvis, which is essentially from the pelvic inlet to that ischial spine, which is the halfway point in your pelvis. And then we have the lower mid pelvis, which is that ischial spine all the way to the bottom of the pelvis, or the pelvic outlet. The middle of the pelvis is going to open more with weight shifting and swaying from side to side. So we're finding more asymmetrical type movement patterns. And so when your baby has engaged, we typically are going to favor more of like a swaying and shifting type movement pattern during our contractions. But if we want to emphasize the upper mid pelvis versus the lower mid pelvis, we want to think about open hip positions to help create more space in the upper mid pelvis, which is going to help your baby begin their rotation into the pelvis. And then we want to think about closed hip positions to help create more space in the lower mid pelvis to help your baby finish their rotation out of the pelvis. Open hip positions are typically going to be leg is moving away from midline, and you're probably going to feel more of a growing stretch. And so these half lunge positions, or like open or elevated lunge positions, can be really helpful to find those open hip positions to create space in the upper mid pelvis to help baby begin their rotation into the pelvis. When it comes to the lower mid pelvis, we want to find more closed hip positions, or belly coming more towards the thigh. And we can do that with different hip shifts where we bring belly to thigh, we're shifting our weight into this leg, and you're going to feel more of a glute stretch with hip shifts. And so as long as you're shifting your weight from leg to leg and we're rotating that belly towards the thigh that we're putting our weight into, we're going to be opening the upper and the lower mid pelvis on alternating sides. And so when we're shifting our weight from side to side, this is helping your baby kind of rock and wiggle through the middle of the pelvis. And so common labor positions that you can do is either standing and swaying from side to side, or you can sit down on a ball and shift your weight from side to side, doing some hip circles, or even being in all fours and shifting your weight from leg to leg. And now, similarly to the pelvic inlet, it's typically easier for us to find more of that external hip rotation and those open hip positions, because that is favoring external hip rotation with abduction, which we love to do during pregnancy, in addition to more of that anterior tilt, so that pelvic half is tilting forward, which again is where we love to be during pregnancy. However, when it comes to creating space in the bottom of the pelvis, where we need that posterior pelvic tilt with internal rotation and adduction, it can be a little bit harder to do, which is why in our free birth prep circuit, we incorporate 2 hip shift variations to help you create that space in the lower mid pelvis. And so you're going to feel more of a stretch in that deep glute musculature to help you create space for your baby to finish their rotation out of the pelvis. Now, the very bottom of the pelvis and the last place that your baby has to navigate through is the pelvic outlet. And the pelvic outlet is going to open more with internal hip rotation, so knees in, ankles out. And so that's going to create that side-to-side opening, which is probably opposite of what you may have been told to do, which is to spread your knees super wide while you're pushing. When we spread our knees super wide, this can actually decrease space in the pelvic outlet because it's creating more space in the pelvic inlet. And so we want to think more knees in, ankles out, so that we have that side-to-side opening. In addition to the internal hip rotation with adduction, we're also going to be thinking about a lot of lat tension. And so if you've seen folks that are pushing in pictures, a lot of them are really drawing their elbows into their side and generating that lat tension, because that helps to pull the tailbone backwards, creating more space front to back. And now that's important because it's going to make it easier for baby to finish their rotation out of the pelvis. Now, a common myth that I see with the pelvic outlet that I want to debunk really quickly before we conclude is that you may have heard the pelvic inlet opens more with a posterior pelvic tilt. Therefore, the pelvic outlet must open more with an anterior pelvic tilt. Now, similarly to the pelvic inlet, we have an anterior and posterior portion that open more with an anterior tilt or a posterior pelvic tilt. However, when it comes to the pelvic outlet, we have two things that we're thinking about. One, we want our diaphragm to be stacked over the uterus to aid with our pushes, and that's going to happen better in either a slightly rounded position or a more neutral spine position. And so if we find a really big arch, this is going to decrease the efficiency of our pushes. The second thing is with internal hip rotation, which helps to create that side-to-side opening in the pelvic outlet. If we find more of an anterior pelvic tilt, this can actually put a lot of strain on our hip joint because that is not the position that our pelvis wants to be in when we find internally rotated position. To find internally rotated positions, we actually want more of a posterior pelvic tilt because that helps to support the rotation of that hip socket. So if you find a really big exaggerated anterior tilt, in addition to a lot of internal rotation, you could actually cause injury to your hip joint. And so when it comes to opening the pelvic outlet, we're not thinking about an anterior pelvic tilt. We're thinking about internal hip rotation with adduction, so knees in, ankles out. We're thinking about lat tension to pull that tailbone backwards, and generally a more neutral spine position, potentially slightly rounded because again, posterior pelvic tilt makes this much easier to do. So your pelvis has three main levels. We have the pelvic inlet, which is the top, the middle of the pelvis, which is the bony structure, and all the tissues and ligaments and muscles. And then we have the pelvic outlet, which is the bottom part of the pelvis. All three parts of our pelvis open with different types of movement patterns. And so we need those type of movements to be accessible to us prenatally so that we can create that space during labor. Now, I would highly recommend grabbing our free Mama Stay Fit birth prep circuit because we address some common issues that folks have during pregnancy, which is finding that posterior pelvic tilt and finding more of that internal hip rotation. In addition to our free birth prep circuit, we also have our prenatal fitness programs that are filled with daily workouts that include birth preparation exercises. So we not only have workouts to help you stay strong and pain-free throughout your pregnancy, we incorporate a ton of movements to help you create space in each of these pelvic levels. You can check out our fitness programs on our website at mamastayfit.com and use code YouTube10 to get 10% off any of our online offerings as a thank you for watching this video. And you can bundle prenatal fitness with childbirth education and pelvic floor prep to save an additional 15% off. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you get notified whenever we release new videos. I'm releasing a ton all about pelvic mechanics, all about the pelvic floor, and how you can feel stronger as you prepare for birth.